Right. Next up, we've got Lucinda Miller, who I am absolutely thrilled to have here. She's an extraordinary person. She has founded and she runs NatureDoc. She provides nutritional advice to neurodivergent children and adults. And that nutritional advice goes beyond the sort of basics of, here you go, this is lovely and nutritious, to this is what's going to work better for neurodivergent kids. That includes recipes for children who are much more challenging on eating. With ADHD, we have challenges around just getting particularly children to sit down and eat and it be nutritious. And these are the things she's thought about. She's written 3 books, and you very kindly sent me our most recent one, which I conveniently put here. Not quite convenient enough that I didn't have to lean down. NatureDoc is very significant. Okay, they have 23 therapists and helped over 10,000 people. It's over 25 years. She personally has a wait list of 12 months, and her website actually, when I looked, said 8 months. And she said, no, we need to set expectations properly. It's now 12 months. That's the sort of level of following she's got. Right, she's going to be sharing things about ADHD nutrition. She's going to share advice on what makes a difference. Welcome, Lucinda.
Hey, Henry. Great to be here.
It's absolutely wonderful to have you here, and thank you for it. Like, obviously, this is your new book, which published how long ago? When was it out?
It was exactly a month ago. Yeah, so it's amazing. It's just flown off the shelves. Amazon are out entirely. They're having to reprint. So but there'll be more copies there by the end of the month. But at NatureDoc, we still have a few copies, and there are a few copies at Blackwell's. But hopefully, there will be more internationally very, very soon.
Okay, I'm going to do this for you. Now, look, Christmas is coming up, people. Do you have anyone neurodivergent in your family? No, just awesome. Right, we are we're doing this. This is a fireside chat style, so we're in conversation talking about you and what you've done. This is also definitely the point at which I've gone, I should totally have got the questions up prior to starting to talk. I did not. And I just seamlessly brought them up. Right, just plucking from my brain, inquisitive interview brain, and the questions we agreed earlier. Right, why do you do it? Like, I mean, I get asked a similar question, like, why are you doing what you're doing, and why are you doing what you're doing?
So, Henry, so I got diagnosed age 31, and I'm now 54, so it's quite a long time ago. And this was around the time when the internet had only just started. So it was pretty hard to find information about what to do for my ADHD. I just had one child, and I was really keen to have at least one more. I ended up having 2 more. And at the time, I couldn't find enough information, and there wasn't enough clarity from my psychiatrist to say whether I could take medication whilst I was pregnant, or, if I was in the build up to pregnancy. So I sort of realized that I didn't have that in my armory. So I had to, I was a naturopath anyway. So I thought, well, I'm going to look more at my nutrition. And I realized very quickly that actually just basics, like I wasn't eating enough protein at breakfast. In fact, I was having a very high carbohydrate breakfast. And this is why, like, within 45 minutes of eating breakfast, I would be all over the shop. My brain would just go completely zonk. I was totally scattered, and I felt like a dreadful mum, a dreadful friend, dreadful spouse. Everything was just chaos. And as soon as I started eating a very high protein breakfast, which is sort of eggs and feta and things like that, it made a massive difference. My husband also has a diagnosis of ADHD, and he'd actually been diagnosed a year or so before me. And again, he started eating that way, and it made a massive difference. So we started doing that with the kids too. We assumed that at least one of our children would have ADHD because it's strongly genetic, and 2 out of 3 have it. One has dyspraxia as well. So the food was really important, but it got to the stage where our son was 5 years old, and he'd had a reasonably okay first year in reception. but he was really, really struggling in year 1. And the teachers were saying, well, you know, he's really unfocused. He's finding it very difficult to write. We're not sure if he can stay at this school. Maybe he needs to go to a special school. But we can't diagnose anything till he's sort of 7 or 8. And he was 5. And I was like, so what do we do between now and then? So I did a deep dive into nutrition. And at the time, all this information about the gut, brain, and the gut microbiome was emerging. And there was a lot more information about, it wasn't called neurodivergence then, but, you know, across the board, people with different brains, and looking at important nutrients and so forth that are really, really key for the brain. And actually, within literally 2 or 3 days of actually working on his gut microbiome, because he had some gut issues that we'd never quite got on top of, he woke up on the Wednesday morning and he said, "Mummy, my brain's not playing hide and seek anymore. I can concentrate." And he'd like got dressed and he'd come downstairs. He was making his breakfast and he kind of was doing some homework. And it was just like, this is not the scattered child that I know. And so, yeah, and over the next few months, and actually we worked on his gut properly for about 2 years in the end, he started to make friends. His tics went away. One lovely thing was he found it really uncomfortable to hug. And suddenly he said, "Oh, it feels all nice and cozy to hug." And, you know, school were much happier with him. And they felt that he could learn through the mainstream style. And yeah, so he did really well. And, you know, he actually ended up going to a very good university, has a good degree, and he's now got a fantastic job, which he absolutely loves, in an industry he adores. So yeah, he's found his passion, which is very exciting. So that's really how I got into it, Henry, and why I am really passionate about doing it. And just, you know, because I helped him and I helped us, then people came to me, you know, they just did. And, you know, I could see, even if they hadn't been diagnosed, I could see they possibly had ADHD. We obviously look after a lot of people with autism as well, and dyslexics and so forth. And, you know, so I could see that there were patterns there. And so I started, I think the great thing about having an ADHD brain is you can think out of the box and you sort of think, you know, you make different connections to some people. And I thought, yeah, I think this is going to help. And it did. So that's what we, you know, so I just basically learned as much as I could from international conferences, from reading a lot of research. And then we run tests. So we run stool tests, we run urine tests, we run hair tests or blood tests, depending on what is needed. And that can assess exactly what that person needs. And we get very precise. So we've got evidence that they need it, evidence from research that we've done through PubMed or whatever. And then obviously we're very lucky because we've been doing it for so long that we've seen sort of evidence as an overall sort of trajectory of people.
Yeah. And I think, you know, this carrying on from the earlier session, you know, what we're talking about is, you know, people with ADHD being different. We're talking about it being challenging, and we're talking about the things that can make a difference, and nutrition can make a very large difference. That's certainly I found that I accidentally ended up always with the sort of high protein breakfast, and to be honest, high protein full stop. Like if I don't, I'm actually in real trouble. So it's something I've always been quite aware of. We opened the conference was opened last year by Professor Weiss. We spoke earlier. We talked about her, and one of the things she spoke about was how for ADHD kids, you know, you've got to recognise that there are some challenges that you've got to give up for the bigger fight, which is to make sure they have good nutrition. And she talked about, and I know in your book, she talked about for breakfast having using smoothies. So kid goes out the door with a smoothie. You haven't got them to sit down, but you have got them to eat what they need and set them up well. And I thought it was particularly powerful, that idea of like not fighting to get them to sit at the table, but really focusing like, what's that nutritional part? we talked, and you talked previously about what you've done for your children for breakfast. Like how have you managed to get breakfast into them?
So yes, so first of all, we had quite a long school run, so breakfast wasn't very often at the breakfast table as such, as you mentioned. It was definitely in a sort of lunchbox, smoothies, and the car was probably incredibly dirty and messy, but they were well fed. And by the time we got to school, they'd eaten most of it. And I felt that was more important than trying to have perfect manners. And also,
But I think that's a really important message, which obviously we've said last year as well. But like particularly with kids, like there's a bigger battle. That's the nutritional aspect. That's getting the food into them and giving up the other. And you obviously did that with your own children, and you convey that in your book as well.
but the other thing which is really important is a lot of people just are simply not hungry first thing in the morning, and especially a lot of ADHDers. And obviously, medication is often given first thing in the morning too, and that can suppress appetite. And so you've got this double-edged sword where you think if you haven't had breakfast and you're not hungry at lunch because of the medication, they could end up being serious binge eating from say 4 or 5 o'clock onwards in the evening. And often when you've got to that stage, it can be lots of snacks, ultra processed foods, etc., because they're an easy win and they're going to make you feel a little bit better quite quickly because of the sugar or whatever. And so one of the biggest challenges that we have in our clinic is we're seeing parents say, I just want to give them an amazing breakfast, but they just won't. They say they feel sick, etc. They say they're not ready to eat. So if they are at school, or if this is you as an adult with ADHD and you're not that hungry in the morning, one thing that can make a massive difference is increasing zinc levels. So zinc is the second most abundant mineral in your central nervous system. And it helps with all sorts of aspects of neurodivergence. It's one of the key nutrients for neurodivergence. It helps with emotional regulation, self-regulation. It also helps with the reuptake of most of our neurotransmitters, so dopamine, norepinephrine, etc. So it's really key. It helps to make GABA, and GABA keeps our brains very calm and cool and relaxed. But zinc also helps to create most of our gastric juices. So it helps with saliva, it helps with hydrochloric acid, it helps with pancreatic elastase, it helps with bile. So without enough zinc, then our gastric juices may not be fired up and we may not feel that hungry. Zinc is also really important for sense of smell and taste. And I think we've all can relate to this. If we've had COVID, we lose our sense of smell and taste, and everything tastes really, really boring because you can't taste it. It just feels really boring in the mouth, right? There's been great studies, one's done at Stanford University, Japan, so global studies finding that many neurodivergent people, whether it's ADHD, whether it's dyslexia, whether it's autism, the kids are born with a slightly low zinc status. Now, this is not any blame. There are many genetic reasons why. It's one of those very fragile minerals that we all need, but it's quite difficult to get or get enough into the system. And this might mean that the baby, even from the beginning, finds it difficult to digest food, aka milk. So they have colic, they have reflux. Then when they start weaning onto food, they find it rather bland and boring and not a very exciting experience compared with, say, play. And therefore they become distracted and less likely to want to eat. And so they'll eat things that feel exciting in the mouth. And those things that feel exciting in the mouth are things like waffles, crunchy food, nuggets, because they've got a bit of feedback. They've got that feedback. And that's why so many neurodivergent people need a sensory diet. They need the crunch because they're not getting quite that exciting smell and taste that many others are getting. But going back to that, so the zinc, as I said, can really help make food taste delicious and help to turn on those gastric juices first thing in the morning. And one of the biggest indicators for zinc is that lack of appetite in the morning. There are other indicators as well, and some kids, adults sometimes do this too. So there's something called picker. Picker is where you tend to put non-food items in your mouth. So if a woman is pregnant, for instance, which is this is very, very common in neurodivergent women, is they really crave random things like coal or really, really icy drinks. And that's because often their body is indicating they need zinc and or iron. And so lots of neurodivergent children tend to put things in their mouths. And some people think, oh, it's a sensory thing, it's a fiddle thing. But occasionally it can be due to a low zinc or low iron status. And my kids, first of all, they wouldn't be that hungry in the morning. Secondly, they would chew on their T-shirts, they chew on their collars, they chew on their sleeves and on their hoodie strings. And there'd be holes everywhere and it would all be soggy and yuck. And what was extraordinary is when I learnt about their high need for zinc, having done some tests, I gave them more zinc and all of that behavior went away and they stopped putting random things in their mouths and they started to eat much better. So it's just one of those things to think about if there is a difficulty with eating first thing in the morning or just generally highly selective eating. Zinc may be really, really important for both the eating patterns as well as the overall kind of trajectory.
I loved it when you're talking about the sensory diet, and it made me think quite hard about my own diet. And also my understanding, Ben and Jerry's, the ice cream, their big point of difference is that it has a very different mouthfeel from other ice creams, particularly when it was launched, with all the chunks in it, often quite large. And it was always thought that was their secret, the secret of their difference, the fact that they were essentially, an ice cream with a different sensory palette, as well as obviously that taste palette. But,
fascinating.
you slightly blew my mind too, also about all the chewing bits, which I did as a kid. I definitely remember that. And,
welcome to the soggy T-shirt club.
Yeah, no corner of this thing was safe. Right, you touched on zinc. Something I would like to introduce. So as a charity, one of the things a phrase we've sort of taken is essential for some, good for everyone. We use it particularly in our corporate stuff where we're saying like these changes, essential for some, good for everyone. And something like zinc, it sounds like it could very much fit in that category, where for neurodivergent people there might be an enhanced benefit, but most people benefit from those kind of supplementation, particularly obviously no idea what if they test to see if they're lower. But, talking of supplements, smoothly going through omega-3. So it's one of the most talked about supplements around ADHD. It's had some research with it. Could you talk to us about that?
Yes, so the pioneer behind omega-3 research is a lady called Dr. Alex Richardson, who has a unit at Oxford University, and she's made this her lifelong mission to understand more about the role and the sort of roles between omega-3 and the brain. So, and she's done research on dyslexics, ADHDers, even autistic people. So she's looked at a whole gamut of different people. And these have been some school studies as well as other group studies. And essentially, omega-3 fatty acids, which comes from salmon, sardines, trout, but also seafood, so things like prawns and crab and things like that. These have to be the oily fish rather than the cods, which are the white. And these help, basically, they contain something called DHA. And DHA is the most abundant omega-3 in the brain. And essentially, one of the ways it helps is that oil, if you can imagine, so any kind of good, healthy fat, is going to cause the cell membranes to be nice and flexible. And this can provide what is thought as flexible thinking. So if the brain cells are connecting well, then that's going to really help our neurons basically to connect. And for the things like the dopamine and the adrenaline and serotonin, everything to work a bit better. Okay. But the studies that have also been done on omega-3 are things like also on eye development. And many people with ADHD also have dyslexia, and often they find it difficult to track words when they're reading. Often they jump ahead, things like that. And so eyes, it can really help with eye health. But the key thing, which I think is so important for ADHD is executive function. I think executive function seems to be the biggest problem that so many people are challenged with. I know what it's like to feel scatty, disorganized when you shred your bills and you file your envelopes. I've been there, and it's chaos. So anyway, executive function is essentially helped mainly by your frontal and prefrontal cortex, which is the front bit of your brain. Okay. And omega-3 is one of the most abundant oils and nutrients that help to mature that prefrontal and frontal cortex. So we all know that teenagers, whether they're neurodivergent or not, have a problem with self-control. They make stupid mistakes, etc. But usually when they mature, they start to make more sort of grown-up, rational decisions, etc. But neurodivergent people very often have quite a delay in that. So their executive function takes many years to catch up. Whereas a neurotypical boy might be 25 by the time their executive function has caught up, whereas someone that's neurodivergent, they could be 30, 32. And so this is why very often I think ADHDers are late bloomers. It's almost like they're ready. It's when their brain is ready to actually be able to do everything and juggle everything. But omega-3 has been found to help with that maturation of the prefrontal and frontal cortex. So it helps in turn with executive function. Obviously, there are many other things that you can do. There are lots of therapies and counseling and all sorts of things that you can do, and organization skills and things for executive function. But overall, it can really help. And one of the signs that you may be low in omega-3 is very dry hair. So very sort of, or dry skin. So a lot of people with ADHD also have atopic issues. So they have eczema, they have very dry skin. They often have asthma, find it difficult to breathe. And omega-3 is very anti-inflammatory. So it can help with those things, but also as well with the brain. But one of the biggest signs for low omega-3, which loads of people have, and sometimes they don't have ADHD, sometimes it's not due to omega-3, but it's just something that Alex Richardson has found is very common in kids and adults with ADHD, is something called keratosis pilaris, which is the dry, bumpy skin at the top of the arms. It looks like a bit like chicken skin. If you went to see a doctor, they'd probably say slap on cream and it will go away. And a lot of people say, yes, it's genetic, but ADHD is genetic too. And I suspect that it's an inflammatory marker because I see it higher in people that have lots of ultra processed foods. I see it in people who have quite an inflammatory diet. I see it with people who are low in omega-3. So I think across the board, it's probably many things. But what's really interesting is many people have said, so their followers or clients or whatever, they've taken omega-3 as a supplement, or they've really stepped up their fish intake. So they're eating it 4 or 5 times a week. And that could be pate, it could be, it could be fish cakes, it could be kedgeree. But, I find it really difficult to get fish in every single day. It's pretty hard unless you're really are a routine person. But many people actually take a supplement on top, and they find that the skin gets smoother within about 3 months. It takes about 3 months to build up, but equally also they find that they just feel more focused, feel calmer. The whole body feels just a bit more grounded, and they just feel a bit more organized. So it's something to try. I certainly can spot someone with ADHD across a room because they often have the chicken skin on their cheeks, especially children. They look sort of slightly ruddy and red. And I just generally find the more neurodivergent and complex the child or that person might be, can be that this keratosis pilaris can also be on the torso and the tops of the legs. So that's where you need to work a little bit harder. But as I said, it's not always omega-3. There are other aspects as well. And inflammation is something that is something I'm very passionate about. There's a brilliant researcher. Well, he's actually more than the researcher. He's the head of psychiatry at Cambridge University. He's called Professor Edward Bullmore. And he has a brilliant book called The Inflamed Mind. And he links inflammation with loads of different mental health outcomes, from depression to anxiety. But he also cites ADHD and autism as not as causes, of course, but as an exacerbation of. So it's where a lot of people would say, you know what, I'm hypermobile, I'm in pain, I've got fibromyalgia, I've got chronic fatigue, these quite inflammatory conditions, rheumatoid arthritis, and when I'm flaring, my ADHD is much, much worse. And so therefore, if you tackle the inflammation, then the ADHD can just seem, you can live with it much more easily. And I love my brain, I love my ADHD brain, and I wouldn't want it to go away, but I know, I mean, even just a few days ago, we'd both had a bit of a cold and I wasn't feeling 100%. And I could feel, body and brain was definitely wanting a reset, and I felt quite inflamed.
It's very, very interesting. And when doing one conference doesn't normally promote another, but we don't follow the rules for starters. This conference, which is UCAN, which was earlier this year, it's a medic-led conference. And honestly, it's very, very good. One of the speakers specifically talking about inflammation and ADHD and the commonality of autoimmune conditions being present, and also that when people have something interacting with their immune system, that actually they felt very strongly that people's ADHD got worse, and that was something that they felt was actually quite clear. Which then, to your point of using food and using nutrition to lower your immune response and to manage it well, you can see that sort of direct link. And when you were talking about skin, you also talked about hypermobility. We have another fantastic speaker, like it's fantastic as you, in Dr. Jessica Eckles, who her piece is on bendy bodies and bendy brains. She is the chairperson of the Royal College of Psychiatrists Neurodivergent Special Interest Group, and is one of the things she's identified is that 80% of women, 50% of men have a linked issue with their connective tissue if they have ADHD. And some of that connective tissue link will lead to some having hypermobility, some having IBS, something having Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and I'm really looking forward to her speech. So she's closing out the conference. But your link through what you were saying, you're seeing differences in some people, children, their skin, just fascinating. And I wonder if there's a crossover with her work as well.
Yeah. So Jessica Eckles, she's an amazing researcher, and I follow her very closely. We're sort of in a sort of psychiatrist sort of group as such, across the board, and she's fascinating, and I think she's going to give a very powerful speech. But in terms of tracking inflammation, we definitely do that, and that's what we've been doing for 25 years. So we're looking at many inflammatory markers in our clients, and so there is, obviously we do test omega-3, so we can see whether someone has got too low omega-3 or whether they've got enough. Also, we do track other inflammatory markers too. So there's something called quinolinic and kynurenic acid, which are where the brain is inflamed or the blood-brain barrier is compromised. We're looking at glutamate, and it's really interesting what Joseph was saying about he can't tolerate any ultra processed foods at all, and he also has a history of seizures, and very often a high glutamate diet, which is essentially an ultra processed diet, can also trigger seizures. So I just wonder whether there was a sort of link there, but obviously we'd only know through testing. And then there's something called high histamine, and histamine again is inflammatory. So if anyone does have allergies or hay fever and gets very inflamed. They might find that they sneeze, they itch, they feel very hot. And many people with neurodivergence also have some kind of high histamine state, whether it's mast cell activation, whether it's histamine intolerance, and that can filter down to things like POTS and all sorts of other areas of health. But very, very often we find that especially the hyperactive type of ADHDers tend to test incredibly high for histamine, and they have a very speedy brain. So their brain works too fast, it jumps ahead. And that's something that I can relate to myself. That's the way my brain works. And when my histamine is better, my brain tends to work slightly at times 1 rather than times 2.5, which is quite a lot of the time.
That's interesting. That's, we've had some questions. It's I know it feeds into something you wanted to talk about, which was vitamin D, and then we've had questions on gut health. So over to you on those.
Okie dokes. So vitamin D, as we all know, is a very important nutrient for our bodies. Every single cell in our body has a vitamin D receptor, which is essentially a socket where the vitamin D goes in and plugs in, and then it can work its magic. Vitamin D is a natural steroid, so it basically helps to bring down inflammation. It helps with obviously strong bones, immunity, etc. But what was very interesting, there was a study done where they took a group of people taking methylphenidate, and they found that many of them had a low vitamin D status. So then they added in the vitamin D because obviously they wanted to lift it to get to the normal stroke optimal level. And during that period, they found that the methylphenidate worked better, and the ADHD was just everything worked better, which was great. So again, vitamin D is a key nutrient that helps to turn tryptophan, which is the first most important amino acid that basically converts along the line down to dopamine and then down to norepinephrine and epinephrine. So essentially, if you don't have enough vitamin D, then it's harder for the body to make the dopamine, and then it kicks out to the adrenaline. So vitamin D is really, really important, and I think it's something that would be very interesting to explore more in terms of research. And then the second question, I'm just trying to remember what you asked me, Henry.
It was about gut health.
Oh yes. Okay.
And we've had someone actually ask specifically about that.
Okay, great. Okay, so inside our bellies, so in the lower intestine of our bellies, we have we don't just make poo. It is something, there's something there called the gut microbiome. And imagine it's this wonderful soup of different microbes, different bacteria, viruses, even parasites, yeast, etc. And most of the time, these live in harmony, and they're very, very beneficial. So the good bacteria, so the beneficial bacteria, help with all sorts of aspects of our lives. They help to reduce inflammation. They help with our immune systems to work well. They even, so bifidobacterium, for instance, helps to make B vitamins. So and also obviously it helps the bowels to move and so forth. There's been links between the gut and the brain. So basically, there's been tons of research looking at this something called the gut-brain axis. And it's thought that neurotransmitters, which are our brain chemicals, are actually made predominantly in the gut. So 90% of serotonin, for instance, is made in the gut. No one quite understands the way that those gut neurotransmitters, whether influencing the brain or not, but it is thought that the vagus nerve plays an important role. So vagus nerve is this wonderful wandering nerve that goes from the back of your brain all the way down to your gut, and it goes to all your organs, but it's basically a super highway sending signals up and down all day. Several pieces of research have found that those signals, about 90% go from the gut to the brain, and only 10% from the brain to the gut. So your gut is 90% more influential potentially on your brain than the old brainio itself. So what's going on in the gut, and those gut microbes are very important. So as I said, these gut microbes are the building blocks for our neurotransmitters. And I'm going to give you an example of two. Now, obviously, there are many neurotransmitters that influence our brains. And most of the time, when we're thinking about ADHD, we're thinking about dopamine and norepinephrine because that's what the drugs do, right? But actually, there are other very important neurotransmitters that are key for the neurodivergent brain, full stop, whether it's ADHD or not. And the two that I'm going to talk about are acetylcholine and GABA. So acetylcholine is a very key neurotransmitter. It's important for learning. It's important for memory. It's important for working memory and processing. It's important for self-regulation and emotional regulation. Now, we all, even if you're super bright in terms of ADHD, there's often difficulties with the regulation. There are a lot of ADHDers who find working memory very hard. They find processing very hard. But equally, we're worried about our short-term memory as well. I think we can often be very forgetful. I had an uncle who very sadly passed away with dementia, and there is a very high number of ADHDers who do go on to develop dementia. So I think it's very important to be invested in supporting your acetylcholine. The second really important neurotransmitter is something called GABA. And GABA keeps us cool, calm, and relaxed. Now, what was Joseph talking about? He was talking about cold plunges. He was talking about meditation. He was talking about mindfulness. And all of those can induce more GABA. So GABA, as I said, keeps us cool, calm, and relaxed. It helps us sleep. It helps with that risk taking that so many young people, us as ADHDers, many have gone down the route of taking narcotics, drinking too much, being reliant on on stimulants like coffee, caffeine, and so forth to try and survive. And GABA can make you feel very cool and relaxed, as if you've just been in a meditation session. And so we all need more GABA. The trouble is these high glutamate foods, the ultra-processed foods, tend to create more glutamate and not enough GABA, and they're meant to work in harmony. So there's meant to be more GABA and less glutamate most of the time. But anyway, basically, we want to get that balance better. And again, when you look at the genetics, we do a lot of genetic profiling at NatureDoc, you see that people find it very hard to make this GABA, as equally, almost more so, it's harder for them to make the GABA than it is the dopamine or to reuptake the dopamine. So working on GABA is really important too. So going back to the gut microbiome is lactobacillus. Many people have heard of lactobacillus. It's in most yogurts, in most kefirs, it's in sauerkraut, kimchi, all these cultured foods that we've all been told to consume because they're so good for our overall health. And so these all actually contain some GABA themselves, but also help to, the cultures, the lactobacillus also helps to make the GABA. And then lactobacillus also is a key building block for acetylcholine. So if you've been on antibiotics, and which tends to carpet bomb the whole gut microbiome temporarily, sometimes it takes a little while for things to catch up. And we run stool tests. And as I said, we've been doing this for 25 years. We run stool tests on several thousand people. And I would say the common bacteria that tends to be low is the lactobacillus. So we sort of have identified that it is a very fragile one and it's quite difficult to build up. And if you need it so much for making GABA and acetylcholine, then we can see why some people can go really out of sync, especially if they've got a very sensitive brain. And ADHDers do have a sensitive brain, so that going out of balance can be more easy than someone with, that who doesn't have those challenges. So obviously diet is really important here. So adding in lots of kefir, yogurt. If you do like the sauerkrauts and kimchis and things like that, there's miso, so miso soup, very popular. So whether people are off to, I know not everyone's in the UK, but Wagamama's or whatever, you'll be getting a kimchi and your miso soup all in one. Apple cider vinegar, so lots of people like salad dressings. You could use vinegar, for instance. So all of these things do contain some lactobacillus. Then the cousin is called bifidobacterium. And bifidobacterium, again, you find in many different of these cultured foods. And again, it's very key for making GABA. But it's also very anti-inflammatory. So, and it also protects you from like significant infections and things like that. So those two are the usual ones that you find in live bacteria supplements. Sometimes people call them probiotics, but they're now mainly called live bacteria. And this is why there are certain strains that people have found that are better, those scientists have found that are better for the brain and the mood. But generally, I would say go food first if you can, unless you're dairy free for whatever reason, or you can't tolerate the high histamine foods, which are things like the miso and the sauerkraut and the kimchi. But sometimes you just say, hey, I just can't, those kind of foods I just don't like them. And that's okay, because actually you can rebuild the gut microbiome. It's a bit slower, but you can, through eating lots of fruits and vegetables, especially different colors. So the different pigments in all the different fruits and vegetables and berries and so forth, all contain these things called polyphenols, and polyphenols contribute to a healthy gut microbiome. Also, very interestingly enough, those pigments and polyphenols, also there's been research to find that these also can help ADHDers. And it's difficult to establish exactly why, but it's thought that these antioxidants help to bring down the inflammation. And those are in cocoa, they're in nuts, and they're in fruits and vegetables, especially berries like blueberries. So I am 100% chocolate. I have chocolate for breakfast every day, and that has changed my life since. So I will have eggs and feta, then 3 or 4 squares of dark chocolate, and I'm flying for hours. I used to not be able to. I literally had a scattered mind all morning, and now I am super concentrated.
Okay, well, based on that, I will be going downstairs and getting some dark. Passion for dark chocolate. We've got lots of questions, and we're running out of time. So, I think we need to enter a quick fire sort of round, if that works for you.
Yeah, absolutely, go for it.
Because I think your depth of knowledge is just so, it's so incredible. Right. And if people want to submit questions, go to globaladhd.com and click on the schedule and Lucinda's name, and you can submit a question there. We've also seen some over the chat, which I will pop up one of those now. I don't know if you can read that. So does a basic multivitamin contain enough extra zinc, or do I need to look at a particular zinc supplement?
Okie dokes. So first of all, if it's a multivitamin, then it won't contain zinc necessarily, because a zinc is a mineral. So that's just one of those basic things. So they often do contain a little bit of zinc, because often these multis are taken because they're for immunity. But there's usually not quite enough. And most people do well on about 15 milligrams of zinc. So to look for that as a separate.
And is that more or less than the sort of?
So the RDA is 12 plus, so for an adult, 15 is usually, you just need a little bit more for ADHD for about 3 months.
I was told that not to take those magnesium and zinc are going to cancel each other out. Any ideas on that?
I haven't seen that to be the case, Hannah.
Fair enough. And one on seafood. If it's frozen, does it lose all its goodness?
Freezing doesn't freeze out any of the nutrients at all. So frozen food is great. And that's what's fantastic. When you're ADHD, you need things in the freezer. You need instant food. And actually things like prawns defrost pretty quickly, for instance. So it's a really good way of doing a zinc rich and omega-3 rich sort of, last minute supper. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah, please, I discovered, and please don't tell the people who get very annoyed about plastic. I discovered that if you got tuna or other fish, which is each one encloses its own plastic and frozen, if you put it in hot water, it defrosts in like 10 minutes, and it ends up being a really fast way to get quite good food. But obviously, it's plastic every time. It's plastic, therefore not good. But, okay, we've got a lot of questions in the chat. A lovely one just saying, wow, you describe my breakfast struggle every single morning, and not a big eater, chewing clothes and hair, very selective, not diagnosed, highly suspected 9-year-old girl. Someone, the first question in, forgetting to eat is a huge problem for me. What are the quick grab healthy calorie dense snacks that you found really help ADHDers?
Yeah, so I think we can all relate to that, forgetting to eat. I would say chunks of cheese, nuts, seeds, handfuls of seeds. And actually in the book, there's a very simple thing that my husband and I have lived off for at least the last 10 to 12 years, is we have a big jar of pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, cocoa nibs, and goji berries, and a few chocolate, like dark chocolate drops. And that together is a brilliant, you just grab and eat. And we will have that, if we just haven't had time to have a proper lunch, etc. And that's brilliant. Just hummus and crackers or apple and almond butter is a really good one too.
Oh, great, thank you. You talked to this a little bit earlier. I think someone's talking more directly to it. I find fermented foods cause me to have hives.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any alternatives? I find also too many probiotics make my IBS play up.
Yes, so that sounds like you're probably a high histaminer. So there's something called histamine intolerance. And I've written a blog on that on NatureDoc.com. So have a read of that and see if that sort of fits with your profile. There are some supplements that you can take, things like quercetin and vitamin C, which can really calm that down. And actually, I find really helps my brain to calm down. Also, Epsom salts, you can get a bucket of water with Epsom salts and put your feet in, and that again can stabilize the mast cells. So I would keep away from those fermented foods for now, and work with someone to get the right levels in for you.
So that was actually a really interesting answer, because it went beyond. So it went beyond and was like, if this is happening, then this might mean you're this category of person, i.e. a higher histamine, and you need to understand that, and that could unlock a lot else for you, which is actually a pretty big deal.
Yeah, there's a story about, so I saw this lovely medical doctor, and she'd been hospitalized for 6 weeks with anaphylaxis. And she had so sensitive to, if a nurse had been smoking a cigarette and walked past her, she would have anaphylaxis. I mean, she was reacting to everything. She was determined to come and see me. She's very hypermobile, mast cell activation, POTS, chronic fatigue, the full Monty. And anyway, she got her mum to bring a bucket and some Epsom salts, and she put her feet in the bucket of water and Epsom salts, I don't know, half an hour or something like that. And she was able to get to my clinic, do the consult with me, and she didn't need to go back to hospital. It seems stable. I mean, it's remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable what it can do.
Interesting. I don't want to make this question, so I just thought I'd ask it. I know what my answer is, question. Whenever I read about suggested extra vitamins and minerals, zinc, etc., the supplements often say seek medical advice first, but that is not always possible. What do you recommend? What do you think?
Well, the reality is that if you train as a doctor, you still might only get 4 hours of nutrition training in the whole of your medical training, unless you're part of something amazing called NutriTank, which is being rolled out to the UK medical schools as an add-on. And that's a sort of almost like a CPD that you do, and then you learn more about nutrition. But if you don't cling on to that, there's not much to do. So this is where the doctor really doesn't understand. And so the only, right now, the only blood test that can actually assess your nutrition properly through a GP is iron, which is very important. So iron is the most abundant mineral in your central nervous system and helps to convert dopamine into, converts tyrosine into dopamine. So it's very, very important. So you can do iron, you can do B12, you can do folate. The NHS do not offer vitamin D. They do not offer zinc anymore. So they will do calcium, but basically you will have normal calcium unless you're super sick. And they obviously do potassium and sodium, but again, those are electrolytes. So again, it's whether you're super sick. So really, there's very, very little nutrition testing or understanding. So they probably won't know. But what has come up over and over again in my training and also, clinical work over 25 years is that if you stick to, there's something called the RDA, which is the recommended daily amount, and there's something called the UTL, which is the upper tolerable level. Okay, everything is written in the NIH website, which is part of PubMed. So you can Google it. You can type in NIH zinc professional sheet and it will come up, or whatever. And in there, if you stick to somewhere between the RDA and the UTL and take it for no longer than 3 months, that should be totally and utterly safe.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Thank you for that comprehensive answer, covering actually. I thought it very interesting, covering the reality that if you really want to ask that nutrition question, it's a personal question you need to test, and that's not going to be very accessible. And then some sound advice. It does. Yeah, I was thinking about it. It sounds to me like it's one of those things that people's, just not realistic in our current NHS. I literally can't imagine what would happen if I went to my GP and said, I'm thinking of taking more zinc. What's your view?
Lucinda, just quickly though, Henry, very many psychiatrists now in the UK, and I don't know whether this is the same globally or in Australia, whatever, are now embracing the nutrition aspect because they know that you need a dual approach to really help to stabilize someone. And so many of the psychiatrists that we work with are giving, the basics recommendations like a high protein breakfast, lots of omega-3, good quality multivitamin and mineral, just to cover most bases. And it is helping a lot of people. It's not everybody, and that's where personal advice, can be sought through clinics like myself.
Yeah, and I think obviously if people are particularly if they're complex or if they're worried, then obviously they do need to go and talk to their GP and or talk to their professional. I think that's probably why that disclaimer sits there most of the time. Lucinda, you're amazing. I've really enjoyed listening to you and learning from you. Thank you so much. And I look forward to delving into your book, which I'll plug again. Because I like it.
Well, I hope your kids love it too, Henry. So yeah, thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Kids are a bit young. They'll enjoy the results of it. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for doing all that you do. You are an extraordinary person with extraordinary knowledge and coming here and sharing it. All of our presenters, no one gets paid. It's all done as essentially as a donation of time and expertise to support getting that knowledge out there. Lucinda's done that. Thank you so much. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you, Lucinda.
All right. Take care. Bye, everyone.